Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast, the concepts edition for this week. I am Devin Bedoni.
And I'm Uriel Eisen.
And our theme for this week is going to be process versus operations. What the heck does this mean? It turns out it's actually kind of important, but not a distinction that many of us make. And in reading about it in the past, I've been a little bit fuzzy still.
Yeah,
so
same. And I finally came across it again, and I feel like it kind of clicked in a new way. So
we
go over it.
Uriel put his amazing mind towards solving the problem.
So this is from quote of the week, sort of a longer quote than usual, but very on topic. Sort of from Shigeo Shingo, the Shingo Production Management System, improving process functions. So the quote is, "A great deal of publicity has been generated about the Toyota production system, but the crucial issue does not lie in the superficial features of the system. We need to recognize that the correct way to view the Toyota system is to see it as a production system emphasizing process, a production system based on my new concept of production as a network of processes and operations. By merging the new SMED and OTED concepts with minimal lot sizes and 99% reductions in lead times, the Toyota production system has successfully created a non-stock production system that has raised profits by 3 to 5 times their previous levels."
Impressive.
Amen. So he has a very sort of biblical way of writing. I feel like it's kind of funny. Anyway, yeah, so that's kind of it. So basically the difference I've been kind of struggling with this as well. I've heard him write about this in the past. But basically the distinction he makes, and I'm not sure the language makes that fits in my head best, his distinction between process and operations, or processes and operations. But basically, let's see. So in 1921, Frankie B. Gerbreath, who was working in Japan at the time, sort of early industrial thinker, who inspired a lot of Toyota production system early work, and was, I think, a direct teacher of Shigeo Shingo, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe he taught his mentor. I forget which one.
Okay.
Anyway, he described processes as just basically collections of operations, where you could almost think about it as just zooming out a little bit. And so instead of it being like you drill a hole, then you move a part, then you cut a notch, whatever, the series of distinct operations, that would be like your whole trimming process. So it's almost arranging them on the same axis, where it's like, it's just a matter of how close you're zoomed in, if that makes any sense. Whereas Shigeo Shingo suggests that you should look at it as totally distinct things, where processes are the flows that transform materials into finished goods, versus operations, which are literally the changing of the shape of the product.
Okay.
So it'd be like in information, it would be like typing on a keyboard. Whereas the process would be kind of like, what information do you need to generate to create a complete document, right? For your like job documents.
I guess I'm still having trouble like distinguishing them. Maybe my brain's just stuck in the old paradigm. But I'm having trouble envisioning a process that doesn't involve all of the steps.
Yeah. So I think the thing that made this click for me is thinking, so on the next page here, there's sort of this graphic comparing operations and processes. And at the beginning, I was like, these look basically identical. But at some point down here, it says under operations, pro stock production system. The goal of an operation is to make stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And then under processes, it says non-stock production system. And so I was thinking about, he recommends that all emphasis should be on improving processes, not operations, to begin with. And what I realized is this is the crux of it. Like, the reason single piece flow is so strange to begin with is because from an operations perspective, it just doesn't make much sense. It's just when you zoom out and look at the total function of the company,
Sure.
the actual processes of the company, which involve storing the stuff and it taking up too much space in your shop, or shipping it to the customer, or whatever the thing is,
Yeah.
where you start to see that they are actually opposed to each other sometimes. Like they're not always in pushing in the same direction.
Yeah.
And in this chapter, he also mentions that basically operations are extremely visible, right? You watch them happen every day in the same place, whereas this concept of processes is much more amorphous and only really lives in one person's head who kind of laid it out to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
But in many cases, it sort of forms organically, right?
Yeah.
Without a lot of intentionality. And so, and I think that's kind of what made it click, is like operations are the nitty gritty kind of, move material from here to there, like cut up the material, all these things that need to happen. But, and we've talked about this, sometimes you end up refining those and then discovering that you can actually cut out whole chunks if you change your process, right? Or that from an operations perspective, it makes a lot of sense once you're at the auto saw to just cut like hundreds of parts.
Yeah.
But from a process perspective, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And so like you can start to see that those are not the same thing at all, and that the huge gains in efficiency come from a system level thinking, which is also something that they talk a lot about in like the Toyota way, Toyota production system, is that emphasis on looking at your whole system rather than the individual pieces of it.
Yeah.
So,
and not just the whole system as a group of individual pieces, but a whole system as those being the production processes, but that include all of the what we think of normally as ancillary, like storage, like transportation, like financing,
right,
like management,
all
of that stuff that is sort of like embedded, but we don't think of it as being like you can often cut out a lot of the other stuff with a change in the overall process or elimination of an operation that have, multiple like orders of magnitude effect potentially.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen this in our shop where you can get in the weeds and make these improvements to individual stations. But then if you zoom out and think about how quickly can we get a part, like this is something we started doing like 6 months ago, where we sort of looked at all the value add that needs to happen to a product to get out the door, and how much time that is. Like literally, how much time is our product being transformed actively into the thing the customer wants?
Yeah.
And then comparing that to our current lead times.
Yeah.
They're very different.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Right. Because of batch delays, because of all this waiting that happens, there's good reason for it at the moment. But I think if we stay in the trenches, it's very easy to sort of like make it a little bit quicker to put the parts into storage bins, maybe by building a funnel, right? Or things like that. But it's sort of like, why do they need to go in storage bins? Like that's an extra step.
Right.
That is absolute waste, right? There's no value there.
Yeah.
And anyway, so that's the distinction he uses. Again, I think like the words he picks for it don't really work for me that well, because I think we sort of talk about like processes, right? It's like even I'm trying to think in Fusion 360, like what do they call like different no, I guess that's machining strategies. Anyway, I just feel like the terminology of process, it's like the milling process or the painting process. So it doesn't feel like zoomed out enough.
I think
like the way he's using it.
Yeah, I mean maybe it's a translation thing too, like
true.
Yeah, I think in English those two, like operations and processes, are very vaguely distinct. I just looked it up on Google, what the first definition came up, and it was operation is an activity or activities performed on a product or service by a single machine or person. Process, a sequence of operations consisting of people, machines, materials, and methods for the design, manufacture, and delivery of a product or service. So it's definitely like more the old.
Okay, right.
It's not like, and I think that's, the fact that came up as a definition would indicate that like in the English speaking world, at least, we don't do that extra zoom out.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what he's commenting on. It's like in the US, those things have been thought of as essentially synonymous. Maybe there's an element of like one is slightly more zoomed in than the other and more granular, but
it's just scale kind of.
And so I don't think the words work that well in my head, but I think like his thinking on those topics finally clicked. And I think the last piece that really...
The concept is super important.
The concept is super important, but also I think he kind of sums up, like all these people in writing on Lean and Toyota Production System are sort of like, Toyota Production System is not about Kanban. It is not about low inventories. You're sort of like, wait, what?
What is it?
Yeah. And then I feel like this is exactly the piece, right? We need to recognize that the correct way to view the Toyota Production System is to see it as a production system emphasizing processes, and his definition of processes, emphasizing that totally zoomed out systems thinking where you can gain these insights that get you like, 3 to 5 times profitability.
Yeah.
Right. And anyway, so I think once you look at all the other writing I've kind of read, I feel like that starts to really fit and be a lot less confusing when they're like, it's not about Kanban. You're like, what is it about?
Yeah.
It's like, it's about the system of delivering very efficiently value to your customer or something.
Yeah. I think, this maybe ties into value stream mapping, which I still really haven't.
I was going to say, I need to read more about.
Like, I haven't read a lot about it. Have barely done it in my own shop. It's probably not true, but it feels challenging. But for my processes, but I don't think it actually is. I mean, we do pretty much the same thing every day.
Right.
I think also I'm a little nervous about what I'll discover. I think as we talked about a few weeks ago, like our actual value add time for a product is generally fairly low, but our lead times are fairly high. Again, talking about kind of like last week's larger strategy, like the kind of lifts we have to do now. I think like the simple solution is probably for like adding a shift or adding like unattended automation, both of which are like pretty big projects. But I think probably there is more to be gained just by doing some value stream mapping and figuring out kind of where some of our holdups are, because we do have a lot of stuff just sitting, waiting to be worked on.
Interesting. Yeah, same here.
Yeah. Anyway, that's depressing.
I just gave a tour to someone yesterday of the shop.
Yeah.
And for the first time, okay, so normally I walk people in and show them the CNC because it's the coolest thing in the shop.
Yeah. Ooh, look at this.
Right. But then instead of jumping right in, we then went back to the shipping area to start the process of how, because it's a pull system, right? So I realized that I was always giving people tours as a push system because I would start at the CNC and show them where the parts go.
Yeah.
Instead of start at the other end and show them where the demand is, right? And then how that triggers the upstream process. And I think it made a lot more sense, but just in explaining it, I was sort of pointing out all the places information was queuing up and waiting to flow upstream to trigger production. And then all the places where parts are kind of waiting to flow downstream.
Yeah.
And it was kind of fun to, there's a lot of work to be done there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not sure it's top priority for me at the moment, but
exactly.
It's fun to, I don't know, think about and just see all the potential there, Right.
Similarly, I don't know if it's top priority for us, because I think if we were to try and tackle some of those things right now, we would just stumble and trip.
Yeah. Same.
But it's still hard to like see a bunch of stock waiting to be sawn and a queue of orders waiting to be made, and just kind of like chewing through it as fast as we can and feeling like, you can see the bottleneck, like, right. It's like,
and then just a massive batch delays is most of what's going on in our shop.
Yeah. I'm like, all of this just needs to get pushed through those machines.
Pulled. I mean, it is already pulled, right? Because you have the order. You're producing to orders. But Yeah.
Okay, so all of this needs to get pulled through that tight little orifice of that machine.
Yeah.
And we're just kind of like just doing it as quick as we can, and
Yeah.
it's not quite fast enough.
Yeah. And I think the reason we would both kind of trip and fall flat on our faces if we did just try to go to like true single piece flow.
Yeah.
Just as a very clear example, in our shop, one of our first batch delays is in the CNC. We do like one of our parts is a batch of 40, which get dropped in a bin.
Right.
So to get them out of the CNC one at a time may mean cutting a new hole in our CNC, which
Right.
is
Changes its resale value slightly.
Yeah, it's a choice. It's a big choice. And we're not just going to do it on a whim in like our hour of improvements. So we're going to like really think it out, make sure that the hole we cut is exactly where we want it, both for now and for future possible extraction methods.
Yeah.
Like it's a big choice. Now, maybe I am incorrect in that feeling, right? Maybe it's like, just cut the hole, and if you need a new hole, you cut another one, and just patch it well, right? I don't know, you know?
Yeah.
But so far, just to give listeners a sense of why maybe it's an excuse for sure, but it's a lot of these books also recommend not immediately going to single piece flow because you'll just have massive downtime.
Yeah, and also probably. Yeah, downtime. And also, isn't there like a initially higher reject rates sometimes? Like if your processes aren't really up to the task?
Probably, like if there's still processes that get adjusted every time you run them.
Yeah.
Right. Like you cut one, you measure it, you make a little adjustment, cut another.
Yeah.
If you're constantly switching, you're going to have a lot of trouble.
Yeah. Interesting. That jogged. One little thing I had in the sheet here was, just like how to schedule time for improvements that don't fit in your like hourly block, especially on machines that you need to, or stations that you need to maintain uptime on just to keep delivery. Sort of struggling with that right now on several fronts.
That's a good category. I'm realizing in hearing you say that that's exactly what is holding up a number of our big changes.
Yeah.
It's like our assembly area needs to assemble parts every day.
Right. Yeah. I think, a classic way that machine shops might handle that is having a tool room that's dedicated just for doing internal work for other aspects of the shop. So you don't have to use your production machines to do it.
I'll get right on that.
What's that? Yeah.
I'll get right on.
Yeah. Actually, I was wondering if they would enclose that outer space for you and you could expand.
Oh, yeah, that would be nice.
But, how do you apply that to, I guess you can apply that to any physical thing. You can potentially have an internal shop that is dedicated to building out things for the rest of the production process.
Mm-hmm.
I think actually you can apply that to kind of anything. I think even like, obviously software can be built offsite or
and I think
parallel.
we sort of touched on this a couple weeks back when we had the issues with our soft jaws, and then I made the decision to like redesign them, but sort of in process, like as part of production instead of like offlining that project. Yeah.
But again, at our scale, it's like hard you don't want to buy a machine just to do that. So then it's like, okay, do you have like a separate shift, where one person comes in and breaks down production setups, does their work they need to do, and then resets stuff up.
I think that's definitely like what I'm trying to do in hiring is making myself that sort of offline person. And maybe that means coming in on a Sunday or something for now, right? Yeah. Or maybe that means coming in late and staying late. But just kind of creating a little bit more space to work on those things.
Yeah. Like I posted some photos of our uptime across machines the other day. Yeah. And the dual pallet machine is pretty impressive. It's cool. We're running kind of the perfect sort of job for it to be that impressive right now. Like it's just hundreds of the same part, and they're like a runtime that's easy for an operator to attend to and all that stuff. But a bunch people commented and were like, what would you need to do to get it to 100? And basically I was just like, we need to stop washing the machine out. Like that is what keeps
And that's
it from
100% of you guys being there. That doesn't include the nighttime.
No, that's like percent of on time
Gotcha.
as runtime.
Yeah.
And it counts like the warm up cycle. It's basically like when it's in.
Counts it as productive because it's running a program.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like not fully,
but it's
close.
Still like, a good picture.
It's still it's a lovely picture. Love that picture. But anyway, it just kind of came back to this thing where it's like, okay, so we're spending, 3 to 5% of that machine's on time per day cleaning.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. When described as a percentage, that somehow.
Yeah. Or, maybe there's probably a few minutes in the morning where it's turned on and someone's like, whatever, starting the other machine on its warm up run, getting that one loaded first or something like that. But even so, it's like, I'm pretty sure most of that is cleaning. So that's a decent number of minutes per day.
Yeah.
And so I ordered all this stuff.
Okay.
To upgrade the wash down.
Right.
But I'm like, okay, so when do we shut this thing down for like
Interesting.
2 hours probably?
Right.
Maybe it could be quicker, but with like, trying it out and adjusting things, it's probably going to take a little long. It's probably going to be in that range. How do we fit that in?
Yeah, I would imagine that. Well, do you want to talk about this here or in the later?
Yeah, maybe it's a later thing, but it's just
episode.
The concept of how to schedule time for larger improvements is an ongoing conundrum for many different things. It falls in also like affects design time for work holding. Like I'm busy programming, I'm busy quoting. How do I fit in this big chunk for design time or
for work holding as a system, not for a particular job, right? As sort of like
as a system or a new product. Started working on a new product this last week.
Very cool.
Because there's demand. And it was this thing where I was like, okay, I'm gonna do 15 minutes here, and then finally I was like, no, I just gotta
sit down,
take 2 hours, and just like wrap this up.
Those dropouts?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Anyway, it's an ongoing. I don't have an answer. It's an ongoing question.
Yeah, I think. I mean, in terms of payoff, the funny thing is like, how many minutes do you think that is per day that you guys are washing?
It's significant.
I mean, is that like 10?
It depends on the machine and the job. But it could be anywhere from like some machines we just turn off and leave.
Right.
It depends if the job's not a big deal. That particular job that we're running on the R450 right now makes a lot of these like big curly chips.
Okay.
And there's so many little hang up spots in that machine. And it could easily be 15 plus minutes.
So let's say it's 15 minutes and it's a 2 hour fix. That means it's going to pay for itself in like 8 days.
Oh, it's very fast.
Yeah.
It's very fast. I'm aware of that.
I pointed out only because after our conversation last week where it was sort of like, man, there's these huge things and it makes it sort of harder to do those little things.
Yeah.
I went back to the shop and it was kind of sinking in that I think both are important.
Yeah.
Because I think what I've sort of decided I need to make sure I'm focused on is with those really small improvements, I just want to make sure I'm not improving stuff that is likely to be eliminated. Right. When we could focus on parts that are probably not going to be eliminated.
Yeah.
And so I think that like that's worth bearing in mind. But beyond that, like these small improvements pay for themselves so fast. It's kind of wild. So I think abandoning them because of this like bigger picture stuff, I don't know. I mean, it's definitely a balancing act. Like I mentioned to you, I had a great conversation with a guy who is I've talked to him over the years a couple times doing this project. He's been a CEO of a bunch of major companies in the outdoor industry, and I think just kind of where the conversation landed, or what I really took away. I mean, I took a lot away from it, but the part that we were sort of discussing. That I thought would be worth mentioning here is basically he was saying like not to confuse. I asked him kind of where. So there's a saying: if you want advice, ask for money, and if you want money, ask for advice. So I asked him for money, because it makes people kind of like really poke holes in your project.
Yeah,
right. They're like, well, if I'm going to give you money, here's what I need to see.
Were you actually asking for money, or were you wanting advice?
I was wanting advice. Yeah. So the advice was kind of like where people often fail in my kind of situation is conflating a product for a company. So like he was like, you guys have a great product. It is awesome. There's a lot of clearly demand for it and a lot of applications for it, but you just have to be careful that you're not confusing having a product for having a company. And I'm not sure exactly what that means. But I think, and I think there's a few different worlds out there. Like he is in a world of like private equity, big companies, mergers and acquisitions kind of stuff, not like whatever lifestyle business pays everyone comfortably and it's 5 people, right?
Right.
Like I think that's not really part of that mental math, but I think that's also not necessarily where I'm trying to go.
Sure.
And I think I'd rather sort of position it as a, more substantial player.
I think it's good to remember though that probably some of those points still stand, like similar to us, like taking TPS concepts from a multinational car company and applying them to our small shops.
Right.
Probably whatever he's pointing at are important things to take into consideration, even in a lifestyle business, and you'll probably be more successful.
That's my feeling. And so I kind of have spent the weekend really kind of mulling over, like, what does that mean and where does my focus need to be?
Yeah.
And I think, I've said it before, but it needs to be on releasing new products. But also, like, I think I'm going to put a little bit more emphasis on at least investigating IP.
Sure.
I don't really know how that will work in this example, but and I think the parts that are problematic about a single product, there's a bunch. One is, if someone knocks you off or delivers that value a little bit better, right?
Yeah.
Like, is that it?
Right. Yeah.
Pack up your bags and go home. So you may as well get ready for that, I think, in releasing new things. And I think if you talk to people about like intellectual property strategy for companies, I think that, there's definitely a few directions. And a lot of the recommendations for smaller companies is basically just staying so agile where you're releasing new products, you're staying on top of the market, where other companies can't really. It's like, fine, copy our stuff, but it's going to take you 3 years to copy it. And we're already 7 versions ahead at this point. So whatever,
It occurs to me that maybe some of the strong distinguishing features would be that like the difference between just having a product and having a company would be having like a strong brand identity, having like a clearly articulated like design ethos, which maybe is synonymous with brand identity, but also kind of not necessarily. And then it seems like all of like I don't really want to say administrative stuff, but like having a good system of distribution, having a good system of, kind of the stuff we've been talking about, but of like generating sales, onboarding customers, all of that kind of stuff. That seems, from a nuts and bolts standpoint, seems to be a lot of what distinguishes a company, a business that just produces a thing and like the one thing sort of like drives the sales versus a company that maybe starts with one thing, but is poised to produce many things of a similar ethos, and effectively get them out to people.
Yeah, I think what you're pointing out is kind of what he was talking about was brand.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, I think it's easy as it's easy as a single operator business, which neither of us are at this point, but not too long ago.
Effectively. Yeah.
Right. It's easy to make the brand basically you.
Yeah.
Similarly, I think even if it's not a single operator, if you have one product, it's easy to make the brand actually about that product and not about something bigger. So yeah, I think like making sure that your brand is about something more than just like one product is important. Now, you look at something like, I don't know, Freddie, the vacuum, like they make great vacuums. That seems like a very healthy business to me, right? Now they have a lot of product offerings in terms of, but they're all very specific.
I would.
I wonder how you think about that.
I don't know, but on like listening to that interview on Within Tolerance
Yeah.
several weeks ago.
Great interview.
Yeah, it was. It kind of sounded like it was a little bit failing. The business was not, or maybe not failing, but it wasn't doing fantastically. And then when the person, I'm blanking on the name, my apologies, when they took over, it sounds like they really created a brand. Like,
that's true.
Like
that's a good point.
They had very good product offerings already.
Right. The product didn't change much, but
yeah, but the brand really like was what would be the word? I don't know, just like grown, like cultivated and capitalized on.
Right.
I mean, yeah, I just bought one. Like I didn't know who they were 2 years ago, probably. Yeah. There are other options on the market, probably some that are cheaper. And, you know, obviously they're very effective at that brand is very effective at what they're doing. So I guess I would just say that like,
right. Maybe they sort of prove that the shift in emphasis from the product to the brand and building out the brand and communicating that and has been very effective for them.
Sure. And then like maybe even the company that you brought up last week, was it Sunbum or something? I don't actually know what they make, but sunscreen. Right. Like I'm sure their product offerings are fairly slim in scope.
Yeah.
So that seems like another situation where like you can maybe have a single product, and if your brand is strong enough, it can drive a large scale business.
I think it can drive a large scale business. And then the other piece is from the outside, if you're looking at buying that or if you're looking at valuing it, you're not valuing the product, right? You're not saying, okay, well, how many more bottles of sunscreen can I sell? You're valuing the brand and understanding, like, I think they just launched a bunch of like hair care products and a bunch of, right? Like suddenly you can launch other stuff that's on brand. Whereas if you have a company and it's like, we make this screwdriver and look at how nice our screwdriver is. And now we want to make, I don't know, cookware, right? It would take a while to communicate why all of the messaging around that one screwdriver also applies to your cookware.
Yeah.
And then getting all those customers to be excited, not just about a screwdriver, but make sure that they're excited about the way you make handles or comfort is important, or you should have good tools to perform.
Or early before
to let your inner genius out, you know.
Before we started recording, we brought up like the AeroBee and the AeroPress.
Yeah,
and it seems like that brand is kind of like this quirky designer who makes things you never would have thought of that turn out to work really well.
Yeah, I don't know that I would say that they have a successful brand. I would say they have good IP and these one-off, really very functional, clever products. I mean, I'm not saying I wouldn't love to be in their shoes,
but you know who they are.
No,
but you do. I mean, like you don't know. I know person.
It exists, but the brand of AeroPress to me is just an AeroPress.
Yeah,
I'm not like, ooh, maybe I'll buy a Frisbee also because I agree with their ethos.
No, I totally. But I remember when AeroPresses first came out, and everybody being like, check out this thing. It's made by the same guy who did the weird Frisbee. And I think there is, you know, obviously it's not like a classic example of like brand building.
Yeah.
But if it wasn't like the guy who had like made some sort of notoriety from a weird triangle shaped bright orange Frisbee thing.
Yeah.
Like I wonder how it would have done, you know, like maybe it would have done just as well. But I do feel like that was often part of the introduction when someone would show me.
Yeah. So that seems like the brand was basically the person behind it.
Yeah. Or like an idea of quirky out of the box thinking.
But I think if I was looking to acquire AeroPress.
Yeah.
And all the IP, if there is IP at this point. But if I was looking to acquire that, I think I'd be mostly focused on how many AeroPresses can I sell? Like, it doesn't extend far beyond that product. Now, maybe you could look at that and say, okay, all the people who bought AeroPresses and the things they value that led them to this decision. Okay, maybe we have like a travel grinder, and maybe we have like these other supplemental, like I want good coffee, but I want it to be convenient and I don't want to have a ton of equipment.
Sure.
I don't know if that's their demographic, but
Yeah,
maybe you could turn it into a brand, but it doesn't feel like a powerful brand right now to
I don't
me.
think it's super powerful, but it's an interesting just
Yeah.
kind of like sideline on the concept of like, it doesn't necessarily have to be the traditional thing of like a, a great logo. And like, I think like an ethos can carry through, like in that instance, just a name. I don't think it's the person's name, the
Yeah.
designer.
Yeah.
Like but clearly there was enough carryover from the Frisbee things to name the AeroPress, even though it has
Maybe they
nothing to
just
do
had
with
the
aero.
LLC.
Yeah, potentially. Maybe I'm giving them more credit than is
No, I don't
due.
know. It'd be interesting to do a little more research.
Yeah. Well, shifting gears a little bit, I had a good meeting with my friend about ERP. Well, maybe ERP is a bit of a misnomer for what we're building out. It's more like it's job management. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if I want to call it full, but kind of like purposefully, maybe a little bit scaling back from what would be considered full ERP,
Mm-hmm.
because it doesn't really apply yet. I think what we really need is very robust and intuitive uh, job management, which
Okay.
can carry a lot of other, like I guess when I think of ERP, like that also includes maybe all your purchasing, all of your inventory management.
Right.
Um, and this is a little bit more streamlined than that. Anyhow, my friend has a very, he doesn't know about machine shops really. I mean, like he's like hung out in the shop and like is, somewhat familiar of the concepts of like how cutting metal happens, but
Right.
he does never worked in a machine shop, etc. But he's really good at systems thinking.
Very cool.
Um, and so we had just kind of like a whiteboard meeting last week to kind of talk over the architecture. And he was using a phrase a lot, which I think many of us intuitively strive for, but I kind of wanted to bring it up as like a concrete concept that I think is really valuable, which is like single source of truth for your, well, for many things, but information storage. So not having multiple places where a bit of information is kept,
Uh-huh.
unless, and this would rely on automation, but unless it can be like redundantly um, backed up between two different places.
Sure.
Um, but kind of the more crux piece was not just like, okay, information needs to get stored in one place and one place only.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, what's the unit in your tree of organization that single source needs to be attached to? So we were kind of like laying out a job flow.
Okay.
And it's like, okay, so you get a bunch of prints from a customer, you send them a quote, have a collection of documents that need to move with a job.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say they send a purchase order. Now your collection's a little bit larger. Now you have a work order. So now you have, 4+ documents.
Mm-hmm.
They can't necessarily all get carried together in one unit because one of them is a one-time thing. One of them is a forever thing. The part number is a forever thing. And all the information that in the future gets attached to that has to be a forever thing. So
The
like
purchase order, on the other hand, is just
the purchase order and the work order,
right.
all of
Okay.
the associated information of delivery dates, post-processing
Interesting.
requirements. And so it was kind of cool to break down, where those different like single points of truth are
Mm-hmm.
for information and what needs to be nested within them, basically. So like a work order needs to reference a part number. And then potentially in a part number, you have rev controls below that.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have another tree of information below that. And it's kind of cool because it's this thing that, I think a lot of us beat our heads against the wall about this type of thing. It feels extremely complex.
Yeah.
And it is relatively complex. But I think this sort of applying this lens to it of being like, where does the information have to attach to forever to be most useful, and where will it cause conflicts if it attaches to the wrong thing? So like we're dealing with this in our current system right now.
Okay.
Where we have job operations. So like within within a part right now in our current system, the operations where we put all of the machining information and setup notes and stuff like that,
Yeah.
they're not permanently attached to the part. They're permanently attached to the job or the work order.
Interesting.
And so you end up with duplicates, and there is lots of potential
Interesting.
for confusion and going to the wrong version.
Right. Or, which is also bad,
Yeah.
someone making sure that that doesn't happen. But that is effort spent
It's effort, yeah.
in a wasteful way.
Yeah, no, and we do it.
Right. And I guess you have to.
Right? We're like developing better processes to like make sure it doesn't happen right now, but it still is it is a problem.
Interesting.
And I was thinking about this additionally with our tool management system going forward, and we touched on this a little bit last week. But kind of like we started setting up like a tool list in CAM, and then also a tool list in our ERP system.
Okay.
That was rotating tool assemblies.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's kind of like, well, okay, so every time I add a tool, how do we make sure that it gets updated accurately here? And I think in the ERP system, and I think basically for our scale right now, at least, we just need to abandon that, and that needs to not exist. And the single point of truth has to be CAM. And then we have to build out a robust system where that information gets carried forward and updated to actual physical things in real life.
Right. And I see the trouble being, and I'm sure you've thought about this a lot more, but you output, like it's something I've run into. We do have that single point of truth in CAM, but then we output it. And then if 6 months from now we change something in CAM, and then 8 months from now we reopen that job, how do you know that those tools are out of date or no longer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. But I think, for job or for tool management, at least, I think we're going to move towards CAM being, and well, there's other issues too, where you open, a project from a year ago and before we implemented the system, and we're dealing with this actually a lot right now, and it has old tool setups where we hadn't gone through to make, had defaulted values basically.
Right.
And all of a sudden the information's trash and we can't trust it.
I would say, I mean, others have said this before, but Fusion, or you're not using Fusion, but no. I don't like, I mean, the way they do their tool libraries maybe is a big improvement from previous versions. I don't really know, but it does not do this stuff well, right?
Yeah.
It creates a new library for each job.
Oh.
And that doesn't change. Like if you open a job, there will be the library that is a copy of everything you used at the time, which is nice in some ways, but it is not nice when you update your master library. It would be amazing if it could say like, hey, these ones have been updated, right? What do you want to do about that?
Yeah, as long as it flagged it, because there are lots of instances where we maybe alter a stick out or something, and you wouldn't want it to.
It does not flag it. Yeah.
You wouldn't want it to overwrite an old thing that you had edited for a special use case.
Right.
That's pretty important, I think.
For sure. You don't want it to do anything, but it doesn't. You want to know where the differences are and then be able to reconcile it in some way.
Definitely.
So, I mean, kind of just revisiting the theme of the episode, I think in filling out the kind of form for all of our weekly improvements, I was a little dismayed that we hadn't made more.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the shift, which we sort of touched on last week, is like these bigger processes. I don't know if we want to come up with a better word, but basically like the systems thinking stuff.
Systems. You just say systems.
Yeah. I've been spending a lot of time on, right? Just like me in a notebook, really thinking about the systems of, I mean, whether that's like brand identity and how we're going to build that and what is the brand identity and spending time there. Like that is a huge improvement, right? That is something that's going to help everyone move in the same direction without referencing, without just asking me about my opinion on it. Mm-hmm. It's going to help customers interact with the brand and interact with the brand and the product in a way that I think feels more cohesive and clear. So these things make a huge difference. they are less visible.
Yeah.
Like you're thinking about, like spending all that time thinking about how information flows through the shop it feels sort of less productive in an immediate way, but also like way more critical to crack, and almost like spending time doing little improvements. I don't know if little is the word, but like those maybe operations improvements,
Yeah.
right? Like printing a new tag system so it can clip onto the tool holder.
Yeah.
It starts to feel a little bit like stumbling around in the dark to me, because you haven't like I feel like for me, I've suddenly become aware of these much bigger system questions
Yeah.
that are not nailed down.
Yeah.
And then once you nail them down, that sort of like cascades a lot of decisions, and sort of like everything falls into its place a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So
yeah, I think like we were talking about several weeks ago, the confusion about where to put your time and energy and how to prioritize improvements. And I think some of these big systems thinking like systems thinking decisions or changes really inform where improvements happen, because you make a decision like, for my example, we really need to change our information flow. All of a sudden it's like, okay, we need a new system. We need a new software system built out to accommodate these things. We need someone to do that. So let's hire someone to do that. We need to know exactly where the information is going to go. And so I think, it can be just very like galvanizing and helpful. Similarly to kind of like on a daily basis, like when there's work that has to be done, you go and you do the work. Because someone ordered it and you need to make it, and they're not going to pay you till they get it. So yeah, I think it's just it's a great way to prioritize your improvements. Is decide where your business is going.
Yeah, I mean it really is, and I think it's important, and I think it's easy to put off spending that time, especially because I think for me, at least the past week, I've been thinking a lot about brand. And it is a lot of very slow, sort of agonizing work when you start, because I don't know what I'm doing. I'm reading books, I'm writing phrases, like nothing's really gelling yet.
Yeah.
Right. But it is the work that needs to happen.
Also, the results are not very tangible.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like you get to a point where you're like, does this feel right?
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to go with it.
Yeah. No, I think, anyway, so I think that's the episode. In a strange twist, we actually hit our time goal here of 45 minutes.
Slightly over.
That's good. Very on brand. Anyway, thanks all for listening. And you can find me at austere_manufacturing on Instagram.
You can find me at Lychen, LICHEN _MFG on Instagram. And one thing I was going to point out, we've gotten a disturbingly small amount of critical feedback. Sometimes it feels like steering a ship in the dark, which could be a good thing. Maybe you all just love everything we say. But we're more than happy to hear it. If there's critical feedback out there, or things that people are particularly interested in hearing about, more of, less of, etc., shoot us some info. Yeah,
topics that really get your brain going. It's helpful to hear that, because at this point we put out a bunch of stuff and not sure exactly what lands and what doesn't, and it would be totally helpful.
And keep posting your improvements to Incremental CI on Instagram, and we'll see you all later in the week.